I never expected her to change everything. It started with the mail. My usual routine. Check the box, shuffle through bills, toss junk letters without reading. She was there, leaning lightly against the brick wall by the mailbox, holding a stack of envelopes. Her hair caught the afternoon sun, reddish-brown streaks like she'd picked them out deliberately, even though I knew better. "Hey," she said. Her voice was calm, measured. Not warm, not cold, just there. Ugh. I usually kept my eyes on the mail slot, but something made me look up. She smiled. Just the corners of her lips, subtle, and it was enough to make me pause. "You got some letters today," she said, nudging one toward me. I noticed the tilt of her head, the small crease by her eye. 40 years old, I guessed. She carried it like quiet confidence, not like age, but like experience. I couldn't stop noticing. "Thanks," I muttered, fumbling with the envelopes. My hand shook slightly. I hated that. She glanced at my apartment number, then back at me, and laughed softly at something unspoken. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't meant to make fun. It was observational, like she was seeing the little oddities in life that everyone else missed. "I like that you check the mail yourself," she said. "Some people just don't." I looked at her, a little surprised. "Guess I like knowing what comes in." She nodded, tilting her head again, hair brushing her shoulders. "Fair." Then she turned, light on her feet, and walked down the path. I watched her go longer than I wanted to. Something in the swing of her coat, the way her bag bumped against her hip, the subtle attention in her step. It pulled my thoughts away from everything else I had planned that day. Back in my apartment, I made coffee. Black, no sugar, the way I liked it. My mug felt heavy in my hands. I stared out the window at the mailbox across the street and found myself replaying that half laugh, that glance, the little tilt of her head. My phone buzzed. Unsent text sat there, paused midword. A habit of mine. Start sentences I didn't know how to finish. Lunch passed with the same quiet rhythm. Toast. Music low. Eyes flicking toward the door as if she might walk in again. Later, I went to the kitchen to refill my mug and noticed a note slipped under my door. My name in careful handwriting. "Package came for you." I left it by the door. "Hey." I froze. The handwriting was hers. I didn't know why it mattered, but it did. Something about the simple gesture, the way she thought of me without saying anything, made the apartment feel less like mine and more shared. I held the note in my hand a little longer than necessary. My coffee had gone cold. I folded it, tucked it in my pocket, and kept staring at the door. When I finally heard footsteps in the hall, I looked up, and she was there again, pausing as if unsure whether to knock. Our eyes met for a second, longer this time. Her lips quirked slightly. No words, just that glance. I wanted to ask something, anything, but my mouth stayed shut. She moved on, disappearing down the hallway, and left me standing with my thoughts, the note in my pocket, and a strange, quiet anticipation. I knew then, I didn't know how, but I knew that nothing about my days would ever feel ordinary again. And that was just the beginning. It started with the little things. She knocked on my door one evening, holding a basket of laundry. "You left these in the dryer," she said, her voice calm but gentle. She wore a loose knit sweater, faded jeans, and her hair pulled into a low bun. 40 years old, I thought again, but she had this effortless presence that made the number seem irrelevant. "Thanks," I said, fumbling with the basket. My fingers brushed hers for the briefest moment, just enough for a spark to linger. I quickly pulled back, muttering I forgot to check. She laughed softly. "It happens. We all forget sometimes." The apartment felt smaller with her there, even though it was just me and the faint smell of detergent. I kept noticing how she moved. Calm hands, measured steps, eyes that seemed to catch everything without staring. "Did you always live here?" I asked, trying to fill the silence while folding my own laundry. She paused, leaning against the counter. "No, I rented this place after things changed." Her eyes flicked away, and I saw a shadow behind her smile. "Divorce. Long story." I nodded. I didn't press. That was enough. Something in the way she said it, a quiet admission of vulnerability hidden in a few words, made my chest tighten. I felt my own hesitation, the weight of my age pressing against hers, the unspoken lines of propriety and caution. I tried to focus on the socks I was folding, but I could feel her gaze on me. "Do you drink tea?" she asked suddenly, as if to redirect the tension. I looked up. "Do." She set down her basket and reached into a cabinet, pulling out a box of loose leaves. "Green," she offered. "Sure," I said. She moved with a fluidity that made me forget to breathe for a second. I watched her hands measure the leaves, her face thoughtful as she poured boiling water into the pot. We sat at the small table, the tea steaming between us. She said something about the apartment, how it reminded her of her first place after college. And I listened, nodding, drinking in the warmth of the room and the subtle intimacy of shared silence. I noticed her finger trace the rim of her cup, a slow, unconscious motion. I imagined my hand there, next to hers. Imagine the conversation trailing off, leaving only the quiet of two people noticing each other. She looked up suddenly, catching my eyes. There was a flicker, soft, unreadable. "Don't take this the wrong way," she said, and I braced myself. "But you have a calmness. It's surprising." I laughed lightly, and she smiled. Not a big smile, just enough to make the room warmer, to make the air between us heavier. Our hands brushed again on the table. Not intentionally, not fully, but it lingered longer than necessary. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And just like that, the quiet rhythm of my lonely evenings shifted. She had stepped in, and even the small gestures carried more weight than I knew how to handle. I wasn't sure why I agreed to help her move the boxes from the storage room. Maybe because she asked. Maybe because I wanted to. She leaned over one, adjusting the stack. Her sweater slipped slightly at the shoulder, and I caught the hint of skin just for a second before looking away. 40 years old, but something about her, confidence, ease, made her feel untouchable and familiar all at once. "You're careful," she said, glancing up at me. Her tone was soft, teasing, but I sensed hesitation behind it, like she didn't know how much to invite me in. "I'm used to being careful," I muttered, fumbling with the box. My hands were shaking, though I told myself it was just from the weight. We moved through the small storage space in silence, the air thick. Each time our shoulders brushed, I felt it too sharply. I imagined saying something, anything, but the words got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. A friend of hers appeared suddenly, someone from her yoga class. "Hey, need a hand?" she said, cheerful and oblivious. The moment broke. The woman laughed politely, stepping back, folding her arms in a subtle shield. I stepped aside too, embarrassed, suddenly aware of the age difference, of the impropriety of whatever I might have been imagining. I caught her eyes once when a friend moved boxes between us. There was something behind them, hesitation, maybe guilt, maybe just surprise. She looked away fast, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Later, back in her apartment, she set down the last box and exhaled. "Thanks," she said, voice quieter now. The friend had gone. The apartment felt smaller again, charged. I lingered near the counter, not sure whether to say something, to leave, to reach out. Her eyes found mine for a second, and I saw the same tension mirrored there, pulling back, holding close. "Tea?" she asked, but didn't move from the counter. I nodded, and we sat at the table, silence filling the gaps where words could have gone. She stirred her tea slowly, eyes tracing the rim of the cup, and I imagined leaning closer, letting my hand brush hers. Almost did. Almost. She looked up at me, eyes sharp and soft at the same time, and I froze. I could tell she wanted to say something dangerous for a moment, but stopped herself. I wanted to hear it, to say it, to cross whatever line we both seemed to be circling. Instead, we just sat there, our hands inches apart. I wanted to reach. She wanted to say. We didn't. The air seemed to hum, my throat dry, my fingers twitching, my mind running. I imagined confessing everything, imagined her response, imagined us, but didn't. She stirred her tea again, slower this time. I held my breath. The moment hung between us, almost but never quite. Almost a touch, almost a confession, almost something I wasn't ready to name. I don't know if she felt it too, or if I only imagined it. But when she glanced at me one last time before standing, there was a softness there I would carry in my chest for hours. I noticed her before she noticed me. She was sitting on the bench outside the small park near her building, the one with the chipped paint and the tiny fountain that never worked. 40 years old, wrapped in a dark coat, scarf tucked around her neck, fingers curled around a warm cup of coffee. Her gaze was fixed on the path, on nothing in particular but tense. I hesitated before walking over, the familiar weight of doubt pressing on my chest. She usually smiled when she saw me. Today, her shoulders were rigid, hands tight around the cup. "Hey," I said softly, stopping a few feet away. She didn't look at me. "Hi," she replied, voice quieter than usual. I sat down beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the cup, repeatedly, as if counting something. I wanted to ask, to reach, but something in her posture held me back. "I saw you with someone the other day," I said finally, testing the water. My voice sounded off, unsure. She flinched slightly, like my words hit a place she had been trying to ignore. "Oh," she murmured. Not denial, not explanation, just a wall. The quiet stretched. I could feel my chest tighten. My hand itched to brush hers, to make sure she was really there. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap, trying to appear calm. I stopped. Tried again. Ego used. I don't like feeling like I don't matter. Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp and wet, and then she looked away. "I'm not sure what to do," she admitted, almost a whisper. 40 years old, but suddenly exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. I swallowed. "I don't want to mess things up." My voice caught. "I don't even know what this is between us." She let out a soft laugh, bitter and short. "You don't." She finally turned, her eyes meeting mine. Something broke in her gaze, guilt, longing, fear. "Sometimes I think I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't let it get like this." I nodded, too aware of how close we were, too aware of the warmth radiating from her. My hand twitched, nearly reaching for hers. She noticed it. She paused, eyes softening, then pulled slightly back, as if giving herself space she didn't really need. I wanted to tell her everything, to spill the words I had been holding for weeks. But she had already closed the door, just a crack, enough to let the tension in, but not enough to let anything fall apart completely. We sat there in the cold, the park empty except for the distant hum of a car. Silence stretched long, heavier than words. My throat tightened again. And then she looked at me, a small, hesitant glance, and I realized she wanted to say something, almost did. I wanted her to, almost begged her silently. But we didn't. We stayed like that, inches apart, breaths almost in sync. The bench beneath us creaked faintly, echoing the moment suspended between what could be said and what remained unspoken. I didn't know if I would get another chance. The question hung in the air, unasked, unresolved, but burning between us. I wasn't expecting her to show up at my door that evening. The hallway smelled faintly of rain, damp concrete, and the faint trace of her perfume. 40 years old, she stood there in a trench coat, hair loose over her shoulders, eyes sharper than usual. I thought you should know," she said, voice tight, almost hesitant. I frowned. "Know what?" She hesitated, hands twisting the strap of her bag. "I have a son, 10 years old. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." My chest went tight. I tried to say something, anything, but the words failed. The thought of her life beyond me, of the boundaries I hadn't considered, of a child, it hit like a sudden stop. 40 years old, and she had been living a parallel world I'd never glimpsed. I.O. was all I managed. She nodded, not looking at me, shifting weight from one foot to the other. It's complicated. His father. I am divorced. She faltered, catching herself. I swallowed. The air between us is suddenly heavier. I wanted to reach for her hand. I wanted to say it didn't matter. But the reality pressed against my chest. Age, responsibility, her life, my inexperience, it all collided in a single, sharp jolt. She stepped back, as if sensing the change in me. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have told you sooner. I wasn't ready." I nodded numbly. It's okay, I said, though my voice sounded hollow even to me. She left then, coat swinging, bag bouncing lightly at her hip. I watched the door click close behind her. The apartment felt smaller, colder, as if her presence had been both warmth and weight, and now it was gone. I went to the kitchen and poured coffee, but it didn't help. I stared at the mug, at the steam curling upward, thinking about the twist she had thrown into my carefully held anticipation. I imagined her son, her life outside this apartment, the invisible walls that I had never seen. I typed a message on my phone, started it, stopped, deleted it, tried again. Each time the words felt wrong, inadequate, or impossible. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Later that night, I sat by the window, looking down at the dimly lit street. My fingers drummed lightly against the sill. I imagined her walking past, imagined knocking on my door, imagined saying something simple, intimate, that would undo the heaviness. But the moment never came. The apartment was quiet. My tea had gone cold. My thoughts circled the same questions. Could I fit into her life? Did I even want to? Did she want me to? I left my phone on the counter, screen dark, no message sent. The chair opposite me remained empty. The twist wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no tears, just her existence outside me, a life I hadn't considered, and the sharp, quiet realignment of everything I thought I knew. And so I waited, paused, not knowing what to do next. The kitchen smelled faintly of toast and coffee. 40 years old, she stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. Her face was calm, but her eyes, those careful, measured eyes, held a tension I could feel from across the room. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should step forward or stay put. Every instinct told me to speak, to reach for the words I had been holding for weeks. But the risk loomed larger than my desire. "You're here," I said finally, voice low. She gave a small nod, folding a dish towel in her hands. "I am," she said, voice soft. Not an invitation, not a barrier, just acknowledgement. I wanted to say something more, something that would close the weeks of uncertainty. My fingers itched to reach for hers, to break the careful distance. But instead, I stepped closer, not too close, letting the air between us thrum with unsaid things. I don't know if this is okay," I admitted. The words stumbled out, raw and incomplete. Her gaze lifted slowly, meeting mine, and I saw the same hesitation reflected there. 40 years old, but suddenly vulnerable. There was a pause, a weight of everything unsaid, every glance and touch that had lingered longer than it should. "I wasn't sure either," she said. Her hand moved to rest briefly on the counter, near mine. Not quite touching, but close enough that the warmth carried across the small space. "Yves, I've kept myself careful for a long time." I swallowed, heart pounding. "I know. I don't want to ruin anything. But I also can't," I faltered. "I can't pretend it doesn't matter." She shifted slightly, the movement deliberate, exposing just enough vulnerability. "It does matter," she whispered. Her eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed willing to let the wall fall a little. I closed the distance, slow, careful, aware of the weight of the moment. My hand hovered near hers, and she didn't pull back. Not fully, just a breath away. The tension of all the weeks, the uncertainty, the pauses, the almosts, compressed into this fragile space. I exhaled, letting my fingers brush hers lightly, an almost touch that spoke more than words ever could. She let out a small, quiet laugh. Not nervous, not forced, just real, and it broke something in the quiet tension. "Okay," she said softly, voice steady now. A single word carrying everything we had avoided, everything we had wanted. I nodded. "Okay," I whispered back, letting the words settle between us. The kitchen was warm, sunlight spilling across the counter. Steam rose from her coffee, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. Not perfect, not without complication, but enough. Enough to finally be here, together, in this small, fragile moment. Our hands lingered near each other, close but not pressing. Eyes met, smiles faint, honest, quiet. A connection that didn't need more than this for now. And it was enough. I woke to the smell of black coffee, bitter and sharp, drifting from the kitchen. 40 years old, she stood at the counter, hair loose, soft light from the early morning spilling across her face. The apartment felt familiar now, warm in a way it hadn't before, like it had finally settled around us, instead of keeping us on edge. "Morning," I said, leaning against the doorway. "Morning," she replied, eyes crinkling just slightly at the corners, a small smile tucked in there. She handed me a cup, our fingers brushing briefly. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just presence. I took a sip, savoring the warmth. Outside, the city murmured through the window, indifferent. Inside, the quiet routine carried more weight than any grand gesture ever could. We had learned to share it. Later, we walked to the bench by the park, the same one where tension had once made every second ache. 40 years old, she leaned back on the chipped wood, scarf draped over her shoulders. I sat beside her, a comfortable space between us, nothing forced. The fountain gurgled faintly, unnoticed. We talked about small things, a book she'd read, a neighbor's cat, the rain last week. Every word was ordinary, yet carried the weight of months of waiting, of nearly, almost, and almost again. She handed me a pastry, eyes catching mine, and I realized I didn't need words for what we had now. The almost touches and quiet pauses had built something steadier than any confession. Back at the apartment, we shared tea. She liked hers sweet, I drank mine black. She smiled as I teased her gently about it, and I caught her hand again, this time fully, lightly, fingers intertwined, nothing urgent, nothing rushed. 40 years old, she was beautiful, confident, and calm. And for once, I didn't feel the gap between us as a wall. I noticed her glance at the clock. 8:47 a.m., exactly when she always seemed to pause, sip her tea, let the world slow down for a minute. I did the same, matching her rhythm silently, as though our quiet sync was the only sound that mattered. Days passed like this. Routine, calm, sometimes mundane. Yet each small habit, the morning coffee, the stroll to the bench, the soft laughter over burnt toast, built a quiet intimacy we had both earned. One evening, I lingered in the doorway as she washed dishes, hands submerged in warm water. She looked over her shoulder, eyes catching mine, and just raised an eyebrow, a silent question I understood without words. I smiled. She smiled back. No grand gestures, no speeches, no declarations. Just that, recognition, presence, acceptance. And I thought, softly, to myself, this is enough. This, our small, ordinary, imperfect routine, is what matters. 40 years old, 44, or 20, numbers didn't define us. The quiet, the warmth, the gentle persistence of showing up for each other. That was what made life better now. Later, I would remember the way her fingers fit against mine, the faint smell of her perfume in the morning, the calm rhythm of shared black coffee at 8:47 a.m. Something only we would notice, only we would understand. And I realized, finally, that love didn't always need fireworks. Sometimes it just needed this, earned, steady, quietly hours. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?